Welcome to the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Trish.
And this is our podcast. We talk about wrestling news and various topics from different promotions, primarily AEW, but also New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, and topics from around the wrestling world. Whatever we find interesting, and we hope you will too. We are a proud member of the Social Suplex Podcast Network, and you can find our content on our podcast feed, the Social Suplex Podcast feed, as well as on Twitter and YouTube. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. Today is Monday, September 16th, 2024. And before we kick things off with our regular programming, we're going to take a quick second to make an announcement that the Social Suplex Podcast Network in toto will be having a special live stream with all of the hosts of all the Social Suplex Network programming on Friday, September 27th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 11 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, 3 p.m. Pacific Time, and I believe it is Saturday at 8 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. But those are all the times and dates. But we are going to answer some questions, maybe play some games, and we have a big announcement for Social Suplex that everybody is really, really excited about. It's been in the works for a little while, and we're super excited to share it with you. So we hope you will join us. There will be links on our Twitter account, on the Social Suplex Twitter account, and on all of the network Twitter accounts. So please feel free to join us on Friday, September 27th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So, to kick off the main portion of the show, Trish and I are going to start off today with All Out, which was the most recent AEW pay-per-view that was held on Saturday, September 7th, 2024, in the electric atmosphere of the Now Arena in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. I think we both, I mean, if you've listened to this podcast, you know that we're going to talk about Swerve and Hangman first because that's who we are as people. Trish, this was a hell of a fucking match. Swerve and Hangman came rolling into this podcast ready to go with a absolutely barn burner of a home show angle where Hangman burned Swerve's house down. The childhood house that he had purchased and put on social media. And then they had the main event of All Out, which was a spectacular and tremendous level of extremely uncomfortable and intimate violence that just was great. Trish, did you like the main event of All Out?
I absolutely loved it. Shocker to nobody.
Questions I know the answers to.
What I really liked about it was that it was so different from what they did at Full Gear. And it should be, because These characters progress. These characters have changed. This rivalry has changed. And everything that's happened since has meant that this was, it felt so much bigger than something that was like a down card match at Full Gear in 2023. And it's really funny, isn't it? The level of violence seems to have been the thing, as it always is. Like it was, remember that the Kenny Omega Jon Moxley match at Full Gear in 2019, which had a ridiculous reaction. Yeah. The Barbed Wire Death match, we've seen so much of these kind of things. But for me, the way that they looked at it is they made everything they did violence-wise, if that's, your big kind of issue, they made it very deliberate. Everything resonated. And everything felt like it had a purpose. It was calculated. It was devious. There was malice involved. And that's what makes you feel uncomfortable. And it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable.
Yes. You believed that these two characters hated each other and genuinely wanted to kill each other. And it's fascinating how often people who like wrestling, which is by its nature violent, are like, oh, it's too violent, oh, it was too gross. But they've never very few people are like, I disliked it. It's always like, think of the children, or like think of women who dislike this shit, right? Like the fucking kids hate it. Like, come on, like, and I get
every woman we know absolutely fucking loves this and was a lot less squeamish than men. Even in my house, right? He's got the needle comes out and he puts two shirts over his head to hide, and I'm like, ah!
It's it wasn't meant to be. I think one of the main things about this that I think people miss is that this was not meant to be fun violence that the audience was supposed to enjoy. We were all supposed to be horrified by this, and horrified by what they were doing to each other.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think we get kind of used to feeling comfortable in wrestling, right?
Yes.
So that the crowd feels normally like it's just part of the show, it plays its role, but it doesn't get that emotional reaction. And everything that they did here and everything they did in the build, was the way to kind of employ real emotion and to get real emotion and reactions out of the audience. It wasn't an exhibition match.
No.
Which you could tell was something else that was highly lauded on the show, which is like, yeah, it's a great match, but you don't feel anything from it.
No.
And they, this is a harsh thing to say, but they don't make you money, and I don't think they make you stars. No. They never get people to top level. You need something with that true emotion, that investment that people are going to buy into. And that's what this really, really did. And, I'm confused by the saying of this thing drives off viewers, because for my money, and for when you look at a lot of AEW success stories, these kind of matches have made stars. Britt Baker was made out of that match with Thunder Rosa.
Yep.
Swerve Strickland got his push from the Phil Gear match and the late buys that show did. There's a number of others as well. Blood and Guts continues to be a ratings and attendance draw for AEW. And it's, how many years we are now? 4 years for Blood and Guts. Yeah. So this idea that it drives off viewership, I'm not sure that actually sits up in data. I think it's just a concern thing. And that's not to say you can't be uncomfortable with it or it's not something that you enjoy, but they told you what it was going to be.
Yes.
They told you what it was going to be.
That's the part that kills me about this, is that if you're a regular watcher of the show and you've followed this feud since the beginning, nobody was going into this thinking, oh, it's going to be a lighthearted romp through a couple of hardcore spots. We were all expecting it to be basically, like, how are they going to top it? I hope they don't die. Like, that was kind of the thread going into this. And it's something that I felt like a lot of folks missed, where I'm like, did you just roll up to this just now? Like, nobody was expecting this to be anything worse than terrifying.
I think this comes down to a lot of people under kind of valuing the feud to begin with, and not paying as much attention to the things that they say, because most of the time you can get away with that, right? You can watch a ton of promos off different programs and you get a little video and you think you kind of know everything, but this one has depth. Everything they say, everything they do, every bit of body language, they're creating this kind of, I think Tunnel talked about them creating this kind of visual imagery. Yes. And I thought that was a really, really clever point. Even with like some of the simple lines, like Paige's line in the house burning, low ceilings, and kind of how quickly that can kind of create this. But every single thing they do was related to this match. In fact, if you watched the promos and everything like that, you knew what the finish of this match was going to be.
Yes.
You knew that he was going to be on his knees. You knew that Paige was going to, ask him to beg for mercy, and you knew that he wouldn't, because you know who Swerve Strickland is. And then Paige would have to do something horrendous to end that match. We all knew. You knew what that finish was going to be. They told you repeatedly what that finish was going to be. So why there was kind of this outcry at it was interesting, but it wasn't unexpected. I don't think it was on the level of the Omega Moxley first one, which went off for about 3 days. But no, I really enjoyed it. And I was talking to our friend of the pod, Andres, who's in Chile, and he said he was watching it with his girlfriend who'd never watched like wrestling before, but she said she might not have bought into all the spots kind of being real or feeling although some of them, oh my god, but she said the difference was you could feel it, you could feel the emotion, you felt everything, and that was just like a first time watcher. They could feel it. And that's what you want. That's all I want ever in professional wrestling for me. I want something that I can be emotionally invested in enough that I'm living with every second of it.
Yes. I agree. It just was a really, I don't know. The whole thing was, I think, again, people talk about it being slower. It wasn't as good as the Full Gear match. And I think part of the challenge is that you had to pay it off in such a way that it was terrifying. And by the nature of doing that kind of terrifying match, you almost have to make the violence so terrifying. Like this, I said this on Twitter and I stand by it. It was like an intimate character piece rather than some kind of violent death match, right? This was about these two specific men and where the journey of their relationship and their feud had taken them, and how they had become, how they were expressing themselves, and through the violence they were doing, and how they're expressing their hatred for each other. And like, it was just, it was just spectacular. Like, I don't know. I don't know how you top it. I think you have to keep them away from each other for a period of time, because you can't, like, this is not getting better. And, like, quite frankly, you've got two great wrestlers who should now be able to go off and interact with other great wrestlers and, like, bring some of this great feud type stuff to other programs and other people who might need the help with it. But we'll see how that goes. But I know.
The one thing there was some stuff I really liked, some spots I really liked. I like the callbacks. I like the stapling of Swerve's family onto.
Yes.
First he staples it over Hangman's heart, then his face, which I thought was a nice little touch. The stake spot, which they have the stake from from Swerve's house, and amazingly people didn't realize it was, even though he literally picks it up and goes, "Whose house?" It's like, come on, like, wake up.
I loved the beginning. I loved how, like, they were absolutely ready to murder each other before they even got into the ring, to the point where Prince Nana had to be like, "You fucking idiots. Don't die right now." Like, that was just spectacular.
And I loved, the thing about the needle spot, and you can feel however you want about that, it plays on a fear that people have, which is why. But one of the kind of things that's kind of gone under the radar for Page, and the way he feels in his character, he has this thing, it's all over his merch actually, it just says judge, jury, executioner.
Yep.
And the needle was that thing of, I asked you to beg for mercy, and I want you to beg, and then I won't give you forgiveness. But he didn't beg, so he wiped the smile off his face. Yep. That laughter that dominated the close of Full Gear after that match, that was gone. And he does that, he takes the grill out, he puts the needle through the face, and then he has the chair shot. So it's calculated, because it's almost like he knew that he wouldn't kind of beg. So there was like that thing, and that thing of like being the executioner is that thing that Page has held on to, of being the kind of the righteousness of it, like,
yes,
I'm doing the right thing, like it's my role. I hate violence. I think he said in the Moxley thing, I hate violence to the core, but I have to do this. And then at the end, he goes up onto the ramp, and I think it's very interesting that if you went on to any social media the next day, the biggest kind of clip or the thing you would have saw most, it wasn't the violence, it wasn't the needle or the chair shot or the cinder block or the house call into the cage. It was Page walking up the ramp and then turning around to walk back down.
Right.
And then the noise from that crowd as he did, him realizing that he can't go back. That's it. I can't, remorse, everything is gone. That's it. I've turned to that side. It's not just me trying to be righteous anymore.
Right.
I follow the dark side. Fully Darth Vader,
I think for me, that reaction from the crowd, and it's been talked about by so many people, but part of it for me is that if there were a few folks who were like, oh, the audience didn't like it, the audience wasn't reacting, which I think misses the point where there weren't any, this wasn't the kind of match with spots for the audience to react to. It didn't build to that kind of reaction, and that's, I think, different than their Full Gear match. But I also think the reaction that you get the audience from the very, very end of that shows how just much the audience was with you during that whole thing. Like, just him taking 4 or 5 steps, and the entire audience makes this kind of collective groaning noise of like, oh my God, we can't handle more of this. Like, and not like, it was just... that more than anything else said to me, the audience has been with them the whole time. Like, it sort of cemented the overall reaction to this feud.
I thought it was an interesting thing to say, because it started slow in terms of noise. Well, because you've just done a mega heat angle just before, and we can talk about the value of doing that and not doing that right before as you do. But it's like, I thought the reactions were pretty good to most spots. I don't know. I just I don't know what you expected to feel. If you want something that's like, each cheer for each side, then you do something like they did at Full Gear.
Right.
But that is comfortable violence. As much as that was extreme violence, that is comfortable violence where, you're cheering violence for the sake of violence in some ways, and not as much about character. Whereas this one, I think this one was more important in a way.
Yes.
In terms of their outlook going forward. So, yeah, I can see that, But it was clever because, there was one woman that kind of screamed as he walked back down, and he's clever enough, and they're both very much detail orientated to notice exactly when and then to stop and do the next bit.
Right.
So, his timing was kind of immaculate on that. But, it was a phenomenal main event. great that they got the main event. The lights out stip it's there to protect the title as well. But also it's one of them things that means that they can come back to this match at some point.
Yes.
There isn't a definitive win. Paige doesn't have a win on the record. There isn't a clean pinfall. This was ref stoppage with the chair shot. And also, you can come back to it as a title match. Maybe one day we will get that stadium main event for this match, but we'll see. But it's kind of funny. The build, the 2-week build, just I couldn't help but feel like, God, what would this have been like if we had this all summer?
Yeah.
There's absolutely no doubt after this that it could have main evented Wembley. Obviously, they wouldn't have done this match. Why?
Anybody who's like, well, they couldn't have main evented Wembley. Like, do you think that these two wrestlers, with the level of intelligence and the way that they've put matches together, would put this match together for a stadium main event? Like, that to me is one of the most ridiculous. Like, I get why people are like, oh, they couldn't have done that. Nobody thinks they could have done this in Wembley Stadium. Not even the freaking wrestlers think they could have had this match in Wembley Stadium. They would have had to have done something different, and they would have done something different. So this idea that oh, it couldn't have main evented Wembley, they had to do it here. No, they didn't. Come on, don't be ridiculous.
And I think when we get to the end of the year, we'll kind of look back on that and see how kind of sensible that decision was or wasn't. But yeah, that's what it is. But I do think when you look at what they built in 2 weeks, and you look at the kind of the house burning angle, which has kind of been kind of set up from everything that Paige has done since he returned.
Yes.
What they're so clever as is no matter how many creative changes there's been, and there's been a fair few, it never feels that way. Everything flows when it comes to these characters. And, that house burning thing was exceptional. And it could have been really goofy. It could have been really kind of, just kind of cartoonish, but it wasn't, because of the incredible monologue and kind of visual and execution of the burn side. And then the reactions of Swerve and Nana were kind of spot on. And that was, and it was realistic, because everybody knows that Paige is a filmmaker. Right. They know that's what his degree is in. They know that he, was editing stuff. He edits stuff for BTE. It's kind of built into the kind of kayfabe anyway. So, but it works as well, because it was, it's a psychological thing. Right. His whole point is to get to Swerve emotionally. It's not a cartoon character. Right. I'm going to burn your house down, everyone in it. But yeah, I just thought that that angle was it really was memorable. It was
I thought it was memorable, and I thought Swerve did a spectacular job. Like Swerve had that again. Hangman had a very difficult job. He had to do the monologue, was very hard, but Swerve had to do an emotion. He had to emote in the ring for both the audience at home watching on television and the audience in the arena watching him live, right? So you have to do both big acting and small acting simultaneously, which is really not that easy to do. And I thought he did a great job with it. It was a very challenging to try and have a reaction to that, and I thought he did a very good job with it.
And the thing about these two is that I think it really shows the value of collaboration and not being afraid to put somebody over. Thank God they found each other, because it got Swerve to the main event. Yep. And it really rejuvenated Hangman to the point where people actually are starting to recognize, how good this guy is after 5 years now.
Well, the amount of fantasy booking of the amount of fantasy booking of Hangman for a title win and Hangman for a main event, like, it's almost everywhere, and you see it constantly, and it's just like, Jesus. That would be great, wouldn't it?
And there's questions over that. So realistically, when you look at what's next, there might have been a time this year where that could have been a possibility. I think it's, kind of clear to see right now that you can tell from the next kind of show that belt is kind of for now moving away from their kind of universe. Right. From the kind of Swerve Strickland and Hangman program, and more into Moxley and Darby and that sort of thing. So, and for me, I know we went into Wednesday, and it wasn't really about thinking that Paige was going to suddenly be involved in the world title, because we knew that wasn't realistic. No. But we wanted to see if he can be focused on, or a central part of the show, in the way that Ospreay is, in the way Jericho is, in the way that Moxley is, or Danielson, MJF. So them guys that are treated kind of as the main characters, who have multiple segments on the show, whose segments are promoted, who go from one important thing to another. They always fall upwards. So Moxley and Danielson have been, and Max and Ospreay are kind of all fitting that thing where there's always something set up for them to do that's important. And I don't know if we saw that. So it's early days. It doesn't feel like anything's changed, but I think the want for things to change is going to get pretty hefty by the end of the year, because this is the second time this year since he's come back that they've inserted another heel above him.
Yeah.
And each time he finds his way back up. So sooner or later, you've got to push the guy, because he's just going to eat you up otherwise. Doesn't matter who is above him. And they did this thing where he's now, to keep him away from the belt, it's kind of I'm going to take out anybody that stood in my way, and that could be Jeff Jarrett's obviously up first, and then could be Samoa Joe. Danielson could go in now, although that's probably highly unlikely. Christian, Darby, Buck, Sakata, Jack Perry. You could do anybody that's in the gauntlet. He could run for all of them.
Yeah.
But the longer it goes, the more kind of I think the anticipation of him moving up will be. And I think it was interesting as well in the house burning promo that he mentioned keeping Swerve away from the title again.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're going to do this again. I'm going to make this work this time. We're actually going to fucking do it this time. But he put that in that. And for Swerve, I thought this was the culmination of the story that he's set up since the beginning of his title feud. So this is paying for his sins. This is the thing that he's set up all the way back with the Christian feud. And this is, the kind of the completion of his babyface turn, the kind of turmoil that you have to suffer to be a babyface that many thought was missing at the start of this run. That that you kept hearing that he hadn't earned his babyface turn. Well, now he's earned it.
Yeah.
And he's sensible enough to know that the best way to sell this is to take some time. The same way that Paige did after the Texas Death match at Full Gear last year. And that's the right thing to do, and that helps to kind of solidify what happened here too. So I'm sure we'll see him back soon, but it also helps him to take that break, and for the fans as well. You get that reaction moment. So yeah, it's a good time for him. He's had a incredible year.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to write his Wrestler of the Year business case at the end of the year. I think we'll do that.
It's up there. Like, in regards to the rest of the show, before we move on to some other stuff, because I want to jump to Dynamite, but I don't want to jump to Dynamite before talking about some of the rest of All Out. Was there anything else on the card that stood out for you in terms of just, you really enjoyed it, you disliked it, where was your head in terms of watching it?
Oh, it's such a dangerous question. A few things. So I thought Willow and Chris was fantastic.
Yes.
They finally had that match. We've seen a few tag team matches that just kind of have been a little bit up and down, going all the way back to World's End. But this was the one they've kind of been racing towards. And it was in a pretty tough spot, and it succeeded. So it shows that you can pull it out there, even if you are behind something else that gets a huge reaction from the crowd.
People were invested in the feud. People care about these two characters, and they care about the feud that they're in, and so as a result they wanted to see what they were going to do. Like, I think in some ways they had an extremely difficult job, but the fact that they had built this story together meant that the job was a little bit easier, because the people in the audience cared about what was going to happen.
Yeah, and they're both really good. Willow's had an excellent year. Chris has, maybe not looked as good since she came back, but this was a huge step up. And, it's a couple of years of All Out, actually, matches where she had the one with Britt Baker that was really good as well, 2022. So, yeah, really stepped up, really enjoyed that. In terms of kind of didn't enjoy, everyone's talking about Mercedes and Shida. Yeah, that was a mess. Which is frustrating because they had a very good TV match. But there's just, you're going to have one of them sometimes. It just so happens. But I thought it was a very collectively strong pay-per-view that really kind of felt different, had great energy, and then showed that you could be different. You didn't have to just do all these things to make it where we just kind of make everybody happy. Actually, no, sometimes the heels have to win, and we have to have these things to create that kind of uphill climb for the baby faces. So great atmosphere as well. Lots of people in the building. I just very much enjoyed this show. Just felt complete antithesis of some of the things from last year that drove me up the wall. So what about yourself?
It was a fun watch. It was an easy watch. There were I had some relatively minor nitpicks. I thought, Danielson and Jack Perry probably could have gone 10 minutes shorter and it would have been a better
Oh yeah.
match, right?
Yes.
I don't know why MJF won. That made no sense to me. But whatever. It was what it was. I thought the angle with Moxley, we'll get into that a little bit, was fantastic. I thought the misdirection, like I feel like so often in wrestling, and Danielson is very guilty of this. That the idea that you have to misdirect is so important that you almost forget to tell a coherent story. And I feel like in this, the misdirection and the coherent story were both perfect. Like they hit both of those like right on the head, and everything made sense in both in the moment and in retrospect. Yeah, I don't think there was anything else too much. The tag match was fine. The pre-show was not good.
I didn't watch it.
Oh,
I looked at the lineup and I went, I'm okay. And I actually think I benefited in terms of enjoyment of the pay-per-view by not watching.
It didn't, I wouldn't say it turned me off from the pay-per-view. We were in that sort of mindset of like, let's get 1 million people on the show. So they had three trios matches. They did have the tag match with the Acclaimed versus not Bear Country, whatever they're now. It may have been one of the worst matches I've ever seen on a pay-per-view in AEW. It was really bad, like just really, really bad. I felt bad for all those guys. I don't think anybody was happy with it. But the pre-show in general, the last match was pretty decent, but the rest of it was not great, which is unusual because I think even for an AEW pay-per-view, the pre-shows are pretty decent. But yeah, they
seem to be moving their pre-shows to more traditional style pre-shows as well, where they are actually pre-shows, not three good matches on the card. It's here's the actual pay-per-view and here's the pre-show. So we'll see if that has any difference.
Yeah,
maybe. All right. The other big thing, so we can do a quick look at the business side. So what I thought was very interesting of it, and I swore about this a lot actually before we went in. Did. And when we kind of were given the idea that this was happening, kind of around the turn of August, was there are a lot of things that go against this pay-per-view. This year it was 2 weeks after All In because they moved it because of Bash in Berlin a week later, but that also means that it's no longer Labor Day weekend, which Labor Day weekend seems to have benefited Bash in Berlin in terms of viewership and pay-per-view numbers, but also means that less people have the opportunity to travel for this show. This was very much a one-match card as well. I was trying to rack my mind to try and think of a card that only had this was a one-match draw card. Doesn't mean there wasn't great matches on it. Let's be clear. There was some fantastic matches. As a draw, I can't think of a card recently that's had one match to draw. And there was no Jericho, Mox or Darby on the card. And Swerve's just coming off a title loss, so you lose the stakes. This is considered kind of the overflow show. No media blitz. I don't think there was any media practically at all, actually.
There seemed like there was a decent amount of local media.
But not
a national. No, agreed.
And the only interviews that were kind of put out there from Swerve and Hangman were actually done prior to All In, part of All In's media. So I thought they had kind of a lot up against them, and attendance wise, there was some. Oh God! So there was a number put out in the Observer on the Friday that was a week old. We knew WrestleTix hadn't updated. There had been a lot of map changes. It took him a little bit of time to play catch up. So there was, this thing of it won't get anywhere close to sell out. It's 6,500, and the whole portrayal was like it's a failure.
Yeah,
but it was interesting because there was 4 blocks they didn't open, which may have been to do with stage setup, but this number gets aggregated and we do all this when actually this event sold. It sold pretty well, especially last 2 weeks. So Tony put out a number of 9,000 distributed, which makes sense because you have suites on top, and that's always been something for All Out's number. WrestleTix had the final number 8,660. So if you take out the suites from the other events, so All Out in previous years at the Now Arena, and if you look at All Out at United Center last year, so it looks like it was about 1,200 down on United Center last year, which was in a much better location. If you've ever been to Chicago, you'll know the difference between the Now Arena and United Center or the Wintrust. And then from the last time it was at the Now Arena, which was All Out 2022, they did 9,039. So they literally did about 350 less than the CM Punk Jon Moxley main event in 2022. And they sold much more tickets late. So they sold, where's my numbers? I have too many numbers. We need to stop this. They went from 2 weeks out at 6,022 to this number. So they sold 2,638 tickets in the last 2 weeks, which accounted for 30% of the venue. Whereas All Out 2022, last 2 weeks was 1,307, 14% of the venue, and All Out 2023 in the United Center did 835 last 2 weeks, 8% of the venue. So this match moved substantial tickets, more than any other pay-per-view match in this building has been able to move. And it's not a surprise to us.
No.
Swerve's building his own drawing record. Hangman's ticket record is second to none. There is no one else in AEW that has his success in late ticket sales, in match-driven ticket sales. And, Tony's probably already given a reason because he's talked about his success in 18 to 34 in that interview with Dave and Brian where we nearly fell off our chairs. But, this was from a live perspective, this match was a huge success, probably one of the biggest of the year outside of the Sting match.
Yep.
And then in pay-per-view buys, so this one's a bit more cloudy, which is not unusual. So Khan in the press scrum called it a significant increase on last year. The Observer said based on early television numbers that they aren't seeing the same. So last year Dave had that ended up with late buys at 115,000. He thinks it's 102,000 for his first estimate, which is actually up on the first estimate for All Out last year, but not the final. This is where it gets complicated. It's not the first time we've seen this year. So Brandon Thurston had last year's All Out at 95,000. So there is a differentiation between the two. And it's not the first time. So double or nothing. Brandon has it down for this year by 6%. Dave has it up. So it kind of it happens.
One of the challenges, and I feel like this is worth talking about in terms of a data analysis point, is that Dave does not get the actual streaming numbers. He tends to get the TV numbers. So he gets the number of pay-per-views that people purchase through their cable TV systems. And from that, he extrapolates the TV numbers. And he's talked about this when he's talked about who buys pay-per-views and such and such and such. I've tended to have an issue on this with him. This is one of those things where if he ever, God forbid, we were ever able to interview Dave Meltzer, I'd be like, Dave, let's talk about this. Because I don't believe that the cable buying, I don't believe that you can extrapolate the whims and the trends of a streaming audience from a cable audience. I think those two audiences are so radically different. It's just not possible to do in the year of our Lord 2024. But that is where the information he gets from, and that's where some of this discrepancy comes from. The actual purchase numbers, unless Tony Khan does an interview where he talks specifically about them, which I don't know that he's ever even done, Trish, they don't release those numbers. It's not like Dave or Brian or Dave or Brandon get these sent to, so that's where it's kind of a challenge in terms of they're extrapolating, and that's where they're
it's like WrestleTix, they're estimates.
Yes. Educated estimates from two smart guys, right?
So and Tony doesn't tend to mention pay-per-view numbers at press conferences. I don't think he has since Revolution, actually. So saying they've been up says that their streaming numbers look a lot bigger than what we may think, which would make sense in this one because we just talked about 18 to 34 right. Are going to purchase far more by streaming, so it wouldn't surprise me. But what I thought I'd do is try and work out from the numbers that they've had for previous pay-per-views kind of how this would meet against expectation. So if the number was 102k, right, so you have to bear with me because I did some they're not complicated maths, but I tried to do some averages, right? So Dave had Forbidden Door down 17% on the previous year and All In down 21%. So we'll say that's like a 19% average, right? So if we apply a 19% average to the All Out figure for last year, it would say that you'd expect this year's All Out to get 93,000 buys. And, if we do, so it would be up substantially from that. If we were to look at the difference between All In and All Out last year, and the differences between that sort of thing. Dave had All Out down by 42.5% against All In last year, and Brandon Thurston had it down by 52.5. So we'll average that out and say 47.5. So if it's 102K, that would be 35% down. So that would be 12.5% better than the expectation. And, you know, if I work out the like for like expectation off basis of All In and Forbidden Door, it would be, yeah, it'd be 11% down like for like on last year's All Out on Dave's number, and 7% up by Thurston. So yeah, this number to me, I know Dave said before the pay-per-view that he expected it to be the lowest one ever, which by his would be under 85,000. And now thinks it's like not a draw. So I don't understand his point there. But I look at it and I look at the numbers from a mathematical point of view. I can't see where this number is a failure. You know, if I use every average and we compare the drop and we look at the levels now that we're doing, you know, so many more pay-per-views this year than we were last year, this looks like a successful pay-per-view from pay-per-view standards and for attendance. And, you know, that's pretty significant considering it was a one-match card in terms of draw going in. So that's a real staple in, you know, feather in the caps for both these guys in terms of what they did. But I also thought the amount of engagement that we saw
was insane. Week. It was insane. People talked about this match for days. People were mad that people were making vids of this match and this feud. People were like, I don't understand why everyone's just making vids of this match and not the other matches. Like, dude, like, could you answer your own question? Like, I'm so sorry that the Pac versus Ospreay exhibition match, great while it was, did not have an emotional component to it that spoke to artistic creators. Like, come on, seriously. I know it was one of the greatest match. I know it was match of the year every year for the last 40 years, but still.
Yeah, right.
Sorry. Anyway.
Yeah, there was one. What was the year that it was like it would beat this year? And I was like, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
And I listed out all the matches in the G1 that year, and I'm like, no. Anyway, but it wasn't just we had this huge amount of creativity. We saw tons of artwork. We saw, you know, tons of other kind of things being put together on this feud, videos on, you know, recapping everything that's happened, people looking into the promos, people looking at callbacks, doing all that sort of thing. And that stuff is so important because that is about loyalty. And that is about your younger ticket buying base. This is how you kind of evoke that emotion that makes people loyal and keeps them with a company. This is why we still see images of, you know, Paige winning the belt in 2021 everywhere, because people connect with the moments that emotionally moved them. Yes. And this was absolutely one of them. And, you know, the house burning thing, it was across a number of social media. It was really kind of making a dent. It was, you know, across TikTok, across Twitter. I'm honestly across YouTube, which is, we're going to do a thing actually on how YouTube is not the preferred medium at some point, and on Instagram. And God, the amount of people that sent me their phone screens. Yep. Right? Their phone screens of that image of him in front of the house, and you're like, got it. That's it.
This is my wallpaper now. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. Well. Yeah, and then, you know, not just that, it had a huge merch impact as well. I was kind of sad that they didn't have a match tee actually on sale for that. There was a missed opportunity, I think. Maybe the turnaround, the changes had an effect on that. I'm not sure. But yeah, did Paige have the biggest selling 1 hour tee ever last week? I believe. Yep. Never got reported anywhere, but that's standard. But that was confirmed by the artist and then by Chris Harrington. But we're seeing the value of these artist editions again in that aspect. But, you know, here's a funny thing about that, right? So 1 hour teas, right? They come up and then they disappear and they never show in like the top seller lists. There has been one example this year where that 1 hour tea stayed up for the whole week, so it'd be top seller of the month and all on Brandon's reports. Let's see if you can guess it. I don't actually guess, but you can work it out. It just tickles me every time now. But yeah, in terms of going forward, that's why it's so important to kind of focus on these two characters, because you've now got an emotional investment from your audience in them. You know, it literally took over every social media that we can think of. there's not many times lately that you've seen that sort of investment. So
No.
yeah, it's really important that they keep focus on them and that they come up with what they're actually going to do, especially if you can't have them around the main event at this time. But in terms of what is in the main event, should we talk about the Mox angle?
Let's do it. So
Great.
yes, so the end. So we had a like insane end of the Jack Perry versus Danielson ended. Danielson beat Jack Perry. All of a sudden, you had Christian Cage. You had Luchasaurus show up in the ring. So you had your first interaction between Luchasaurus and Jack Perry since both of them turned heel and that whole thing, which was for a moment very intense. Then you had Christian coming out with his little box of contract, essentially saying, you know, because obviously Christian won that gauntlet, which he can have a title match at any time, and it looked like he was about to take on a decimated Danielson. And then you had Mox, Claudio, Pac, and Yuta show up, and they sort of pushed Christian to the back, and Christian disappeared. So then they all get in the ring. Everybody's Mox and Danielson hug. Everybody is staring at Moxley because everybody and their brother knows that this is the moment that Mox is going to turn on Danielson, right? I don't think anybody was surprised by that. We were sort of expecting it. This is the first time they've interacted since Mox has come back. This is great. We were all curious as to what the hell was going on. And then Mox, this was a beautiful moment of timing if you watch it. Mox pats Pac on the butt, nods at Claudio, and Pac turns Yuta around to hug him, and Claudio uppercuts Danielson. And then you had the whole visual of Mox putting a plastic bag over Danielson's head while Marina Shafir and Claudio held off the security staff, and Pac held back an absolutely hysterical Yuta who is like devastated. It was phenomenal, right? Slightly awkward was the moment where you could see the hole in the bag that Danielson was breathing through.
He has to breathe.
Yes, he does have to breathe. Right. And then the match ends with Mox and his crew disappearing, and Danielson being carried out by medical staff with a sobbing Yuta behind him. And this is how we led into Dynamite on Wednesday, where the first thing we had was a promo from Mox that took place during like the moments after this. So they're carrying Yuta, they're carrying Danielson past Mox and Marina Shafir and Claudio and Pac as they're walking around. And it was a really effective promo. I was very excited about it after the promo, and then it kind of the rest of the episode sort of deteriorated from there. But yeah, Trish and I have talked about this a lot. We've talked about heel presentation a lot. We've talked about the AEW's audience need to really dislike someone and how difficult it is to turn heel in AEW because AEW fans just like the wrestlers and don't necessarily want to boo them. So in terms of that, you know, Moxley, since he returned, his presentation has been completely heelish. He's had his New Japan music. He has not really been engaging with the crowd in the way that he used to. He's definitely come. It does feel like he's read the criticism, right? And so for me in this moment, and I know there were a lot of people who were really upset and off-put by the suffocating incident, which I found kind of funny because there's so many other things in wrestling that like I viscerally respond to it. In this, I was like, oh, it's fine. Like, he's breathing, and the visual of the bag didn't bother me. And I get that it bothered other people. That's not the issue. But it just was, for me, such an effective way of making Moxley the bad guy, right? You know, here's the valiant Danielson, you know, who is trying so hard to continue to be our world champion. And here's Mox coming in to just absolutely murder him, right? And I just thought that was, I don't know. I thought it was an extremely effective heel turn. I really liked it. I liked how it was executed. I thought it was great the way they tied in the stuff with Claudio and Pac. Like, what were we saying last time? Like, why the fuck is Pac there? You're trying to gaslight me into believing that he'd been there the whole time. Like, what the hell's going on? Well, no, there's a reason for it. Thank you, Jesus. I love that, right? So, like, this I thought was, as heel turns go, this one was pretty effective for me. Trish, did it also become effective for you?
Yeah, because it was everything that his heel turn last year wasn't.
Yes.
Yeah, when he didn't change the music or his look or the way he talked or his cadence or the way he interacted with the crowd or his actions, nothing changed. And that kind of made that heel turn feel very redundant. And we were very disappointed in it. I mean, it was, we noted our frustrations with the Blackpool Combat Club at that time.
On many occasions, we've noted those
occasions, like, yeah, like this is this thing is holding back things from progressing forward. And I think it shows how important it is to get a motivated Jon Moxley back.
Yes.
And He's been in and around in important spots for the last year, but he's not been Jon Moxley. This
No.
isn't a Jon Moxley we know. This isn't the guy that, was so captivating coming into AEW, who held them up during the pandemic. This is it's been a different guy. It's been someone who's, you can read his frustrations in his promos on his face.
And who has felt checked out at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was starting to come into his work, which it never has this year.
Right.
Especially with the IWGP run, the US shows that he did during that period. So, yeah, it's so important to get him back fresh and as a key part of this show. If this show centers around guys like Swerve and Hangman and Jon Moxley, this company in a direction of the way people view it will be a lot stronger. I guarantee you.
Oh, yeah.
We have to give props to our friend Peter as well, who absolutely said Pac was giving Danielson the R's at Wembley.
Yep.
And was adamant about it, and he was right. So fair play.
Yep.
So here's some question for you before we discuss Grand Slam. So last time we discussed, I asked you whether you thought Darby or Mox should challenge Danielson at Wrestle Dream and beat him for the title, and you said that you think Darby would be the better option. Okay, with everything that's happened this week at the pay-per-view and on Dynamite, do you feel different about that now or not?
So I'm going to do a weasel. I'm going to do a weasel answer.
So
as of right now, no. I still don't feel differently about it. I still think that Darby is the better option to dethrone Danielson for a lot of reasons. That said, if this is a setup for a longer, Darby overcomes storyline where there's something actually to a title chase, and we you know what I mean, like where it goes on for a period of time and there's setbacks and there's a story to it, I would be more inclined to be interested in it, right? And if you can't do that story with Danielson because he's got to have neck surgery in the next 3 months and you want to make that a longer story and you need to have it with Jon Moxley, then I'm happier with it than I'm not happier with it, right? Like I would rather have an emotional Darby win over Moxley than a bloodless face win for Darby over Danielson, which, so that's kind of where I'm at. I still don't really see the benefit of and I mean, maybe this is where I get too business brain, right? Like who benefits if Mox beats Danielson? But I also feel like I would like to see a BCC story executed slightly better than what we saw on Wednesday, although I don't think that was the wrestler's fault.
Oh boy.
As much as it was the episode was set up weirdly. But yeah, so I will still say yes, but with caveats, right? If they're bringing me something juicy, I'll accept it and go with it. I'll be happy.
So Wednesday, for the stuff between that pre-tape at the beginning and the stuff between Darby and Moxley, especially from Moxley's side, was very good.
Yes.
But they then made some changes to the Grand Slam card that were frankly illogical and just felt
fucking
weird.
Dumb.
Yeah, they were dumb. Fuck it, I don't care.
They're fucking dumb.
So Grand Slam is at where are we? 4,593 as of yesterday. They added 182 in the last 3 days. Last year's Grand Slam finished at 11,263. On the last day, it was actually around 9,000, but WrestleTix was already aware there was going to be 4 blocks of comps on one upper part. 10 days out, it was at 6,192. So about 1,500 up on the year. So these changes that they've made to the card with the ROH nostalgia match with Nigel and Danielson and Darby and Mox, do you think that is going to really help to move this along?
I don't think anything is going to help to move this along. I think one of the challenges, I think it's worthwhile pointing out to people, right? Arthur Ashe at the beginning in 2021 was a huge deal because it was the first show of that kind that AEW had ever done. A first stadium show, a first 20,000 people. I don't think they'd come close in any of the other venues that they had run up to that point, right? It was a huge achievement. But it's also worth pointing out that Arthur Ashe Stadium is at the absolute is an absolute fucking nightmare to get to for everyone in the metropolitan New York area. It's not easy to get to from Long Island. It's not easy to get to from Manhattan. It's really fucking hard to get to from New Jersey. It's just not an easy venue to get to. So you have to really have an audience that is super invested and into going, especially since you've been doing shows at UBS, which is much easier to get to for Long Islanders. It's difficult, right? So like what are you selling me at Grand Slam that's going to make me schlep all the way to Queens on a Wednesday night? You know, I think there's worth trying to do it. I do think that, clearly they tried Darby versus, although I don't know how much they were trying to actually sell Darby versus Danielson, because they seem to stop talking about it pretty quickly after it happened. It wasn't like they were pushing that this match was going to happen, or they were making it a huge selling point, right? So maybe this is going to do slightly better, but quite frankly, I think the best hope they have is a hardcore New York media push. I mean, last year, 6,000 was considered a huge failure, and they got to 10,000 off the back of basically, like you said, comps and having MJF on every piece of media in the metro New York area, which also boosted their ratings for that week, if you remember correctly, because they had a big number because they had so much media and so much interest in it from metro New York. But I've digressed. I don't know. I think it's an effort. No, it's right. I think it's an effort, but I also think that like at this point, this is what is showing you the weakness of what your current title holder is, right? And everything underneath it, right? And you have not yet had, I think, and I'm guilty of this, right? Like I watched the show on Wednesday and I was like, yawn. And then I'm like, okay, right? Like I'm annoyed at certain things and I want other things to happen. But realistically, any program that they're going to build takes time. And I kept thinking back to the show after World's End, where like I was desperately hoping for a reset and the show just seemed fucking boring and status quo. And then the week after it got really good and was interesting again. So I can understand why the ticket going public is not necessarily as invested in these feuds, since for most, they just literally started. Like Mox Darby just started this week. Like there's not much else there right now. I mean, I understand there's the huge draw in Danielson versus Nigel McGuinness. For a small subset of the male population, but whatever. We'll get into that at a later time. I'm being too sarcastic, but we were assured this would sell out Wembley. And now
we've been assured of a lot of things.
Been assured of a lot of fucking things in our 52, whatever. Anyway, I don't know. That's where I'm kind of at with this. Part of me is like, Jesus fucking Christ, but the other part of me is like, they do need to have a little bit of time to get some of this shit going. And I personally also just need to be a little bit more fucking patient.
Some of this is the schedule playing up on them. So you're going.
They fucked themselves with this.
Yeah, they have. They go. So when they did the first Grand Slam, that was a special event. It was obviously the first show in New York, but it was a special event. It was like the 5th pay-per-view of the year. That's what it felt like.
It was huge.
Yeah. Whereas this year they're going all in, all out, Grand Slam, 5th anniversary show in Pittsburgh, Title Tuesday, Wrestle Dream.
Right.
It's just another event. And this is a market, or a wider market. If you think about the tri-state area that has had Forbidden Door pay-per-view is going to have Full Gear in a few months. Right. So, that's a lot of challenge to say, why would I go to this show on a round Wednesday when I can go to these shows at the weekend and are much more accessible, easier for me to manage. So I think that makes a huge difference. They're going to have a bit more TV challenge as well this year, and maybe local market challenge. So last year, one of the big promotion things they did was they went to the Mets game on the Sunday. Yep. A lot of press came from that. Well, the Mets are going to be in a series of the Braves, so they're actually going to be away in Atlanta, but that's their nearest challenger in the wild. They're level. They're going into this week in the wild card. So that series is going to be huge competition on TV for viewership, and also for that live market, because it's not at home, it's not at Citi Field across the road from Arthur Ashe, but you can bet that New York market is going to want to see those games. Yep. It's especially the Mets viewership, and we've seen Mets Yankees games and other Mets games have impacts on Dynamite in the past. Season premieres for a lot of the linear channels and for cable channels are earlier this year. So last year they actually got in just before all those premieres, and that really helped the rating. This year they are going to face that, and any sort of media blitz is going to be challenged. The fact that WWE are flooding the market with media this year for just having their SmackDown USA debut and then for the NXT and CW debut. So it's a different marketplace. So there are more challenges. But the one thing I want to say, right, is okay, like the way that they've got to Danielson and Nigel is just stupid to me. I
Dumb.
can't, you know what, it's fine, you've done it. But once we finish this run and, and Danielson drops it to whoever he wants to drop it to, and we get to Wrestle Dream, and, it's another arena that needs a kick numbers wise, currently at 4,884. And, that's likely they need to sell it as the kind of the likely combination of his reign. Once they get there, can this ROH nostalgia thing, this 2005 ROH is more important than our product thing, can it just be over? Can we like just get it out of your systems? Get it out of your system, Tony.
Please.
Just do all this stuff, and you've just seen at your last pay-per-view where your future of your company really lies. Like, can we just get it out of your system? This doesn't need to be a tribute show anymore. Let's move forward. Because it's great in those moments, but those moments are dominating this year. They are dominating, and you can feel it.
Wednesday is a perfect fucking example of this. Not so much with the Danielson Nigel stuff, but right, you have this incredible pay-per-view that ends on a fucking incredible note, and the guy you fucking trot out to open your in-ring promo is Christian fucking Cage, who doesn't even have a current feud. He's just coming out to remind you that he has this
he's
MacGuffin.
Got money in the bank.
Right, that he's got the money in the bank fucking binder, because we don't that he can use at any time. Like what are you thinking doing this? Like, what is your thought process here, right? Like, and let's not even get into the part where every fucking Dynamite starts with a fucking heel promo now, or like 30 minutes in the, like, I'm so sick of it. Can we have a fucking match, please? Remember we used to open with a goddamn amazing party match and it would get everybody hyped and the audience super ready to go? Now we're having, like, I don't know, whatever. It's, again, I need to be more patient. I just was yelling at myself about that, but I just don't understand why, like, look, I love Christian. I think Christian is great. I think the shit he's done with the patriarchy is great. Why is he fucking starting off your post pay-per-view show? Why? What? And there was no fucking angle to it. It's just, hey, just a reminder, I have this binder. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Like, Luchasaurus is my buddy. Like, he's going to turn on me at some point. Thanks, everybody. See you later. Like, I just feel like
it's not exactly a money program sitting there, is it?
No, like, I don't know. Anyway, whatever. I just feel like that's the kind of shit that is just like, look, can we be done with this now?
I think it was, I think we expected a lot from the follow-up of Dynamite and we didn't see it. Hopefully this manifests over the next few weeks. You could be forgiven for thinking that All Out never took place.
Yeah.
Paige's spot was a couple minutes mid-show. There was no Mercedes, no MJF, no Garcia follow-up, no Willow follow-up, no Chris follow-up.
How do you not do any Garcia fucking follow-up? That was the one that killed me also in that one. How do you not do anything with this fucking guy? Unless you're saving him for a rescue run-in where Danielson and Yuta are about to get their fucking asses killed, right? Fine. You want to use that, if that's what we're holding on to, I will eat these goddamn words, right? But like, you had these great moments and then you do nothing with them on the next episode. And like I said, this could just be a retread of World's End where we come back next week and everything's amazing and I'm like, oh my god, I was totally fucking wrong on that one. Like, I really like to be, right? Because this was just, what an amazing pay-per-view that you said made you feel something, and then it was snooze fest to 2024 again. Like,
yeah, it was there's lots of things, return of Jamie Hayter. I don't know what's going on with Saraya, they'll sort out whatever's going on with her contract, but that's kind of gone nowhere. Ricochet needs some acclimatization time, I think.
Yeah.
So get him some time to work up his cardio and that to fit, and give him opponents that kind of highlight him. He's not in a position to be highlighting others yet.
No.
The biggest thing I got from Wednesday, though, was from the tag team gauntlet. And that casino gauntlet needs to be special. Stop trotting it out every time you're bored. Or you need to fill some time. I think it was originally going to be a battle royal and it got changed to a gauntlet. Keep that thing special. It needs the surprises. It needs those moments. That's what kind of works for it. But I think it also highlighted that the tag team division is
shit.
Dire.
Also, can we stop being like, oh, it's the Young Bucks' fault for this? Like, can we remember the fucking year of FTR doing nothing except having multi-mans? Like, do you remember when fucking MJF was fucking beating multiple tag teams by himself in handicapped comedy matches, right? Like, I get that, like, we've decided that the Young Bucks are responsible for every possible fucking thing in AEW, but like let's be realistic about this. It's got, like I said, it's going to take a long time to rebuild this, but like, having fucking FTR beat the Grizzled Young Veterans isn't the way to do it either.
Yeah, you can tell when a division owns some characters and people are really struggling, and when a team like Grizzled Young Vets comes in, a serious team, and they get absolutely nothing, and then the comedy tag team and the Outrunners is getting the huge reactions. And at this point, you probably just go with it because they're getting reactions, and that's more than most other teams in the division. But that shows you that the impetus and the story and everything else is kind of lost. So yeah, and then to beat them on a debut match, it's not great. For what reason? Nothing. I don't know. It's a strange one. In a way, and there seems to be some disappointment. It seems to be quite settled that Motor City Machine Guns are going to NXT.
Yeah, that seems to be done.
But I can kind of see. I don't know at this point in the day whether that would make a massive difference to this division, because it's around the booking of division rather than anything else. But it feels like the Bucks, they're kind of hanging on until Omega comes back at this time. And and there's more references constantly to Kenny on screen as of late. So, and he looked in you've seen there's a few pictures of him out at different places with fans where he looks in pretty good shape. So hopefully that's something we see in the near future. On the subject of Kenny, on my unsmooth segue even, because we're nearly the real podcasters now. When we do that announcement a few weeks ago, are we real podcasters now? I don't know.
How long do you have to have a podcast before you become real podcasters?
I don't know. What else do we have to have? I don't know.
I don't know.
We haven't had a super chat. Does that mean we're not real?
Oh, listen, we've got to trust the process on that one. We shouldn't do these in-jokes. We can't giggle at our in-jokes. We're going to have to apologize to our audience for that. Okay.
I'm sorry. There's enough.
Yes, we apologize for giggling at our in-jokes. We apologize. Okay.
I don't, because listener of the pod, Matt, will find that hilarious. So there you go. That was he was messaging about stupid questions.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? It's hard to make time for the things that keep you healthy. But being consistent with self-care is like working a muscle. And when life gets crazy, that muscle keeps you strong. Therapy is the ultimate self-care. And BetterHelp makes it easy to get started with affordable online sessions you can do from anywhere. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month.
But on the subject of a non-stupid question, our listener Lamora from Twitter sent us a question on Kenny, and said, "Do you feel that AEW underplays Kenny Omega's stature in wrestling? From what I've seen, I think Kenny is seen by the AEW fandom with as much reverence as someone like Danielson or Mox, etc. But it feels like AEW never really played up Kenny as one of the GOATs like they do with Danielson, even when he was champion. Just want your thoughts on that." So, Sarah, do AEW underplay Kenny Omega?
So I think this is my gut reaction is to say yes immediately, right? But in thinking immediate yes. But in thinking about this question, I do think it's worthwhile pointing out that Kenny has effectively missed a pretty big chunk of time since fall 2021 with injuries, which doesn't mean he can't be talked about in terms of his presentation. But I do feel like it kind of lends into a sort of like, it's one of those, like, if he's not there, are they talking about him type things, that you sort of question, like, do they do that with anybody else? Right. And my gut immediate reaction is no, they don't really do that with anyone else. They're not really talking about how great Danielson is when he's out. Right. They sort of let people have their time off screen to do whatever. But I do think in general that I would agree with the statement that I don't know that Kenny is referred to by AEW as the kind of wrestler, like, he's not really put on the level. All you have to do is look at last year. Right. Like, look at the way the Forbidden Door got played out. Look at the way that Danielson versus Okada was set up versus Danielson versus Ospreay versus Omega. Which one of those was treated as a big deal and which one wasn't. Now, you could argue that there's secondary circumstances at the time, and a very angry, fragile old man might have had a little shit fit if somebody pointed out that Kenny Omega was an incredible wrestler and a big production was made about him, and it was a lot safer to talk about how great Bryan Danielson is because everyone seems to like Bryan Danielson. So, extraneous circumstances could be involved in that. But that said, I do think there are times where AEW tends to shy away from presenting Kenny as this incredible wrestler. And I think that's sort of akin to what you and I have talked about a lot in terms of them seeming to be way more interested in presenting history of other companies than their own history, right? In terms of like highlighting, they have done this at times, but it's been sort of sporadic, highlighting the elite and their, they've talked about Cody, who's not there as much as they've talked about Kenny in some ways. Like, I just think, that you could definitely, I don't know, I've blathered about this, but I think yes again with caveats.
No straight answers today.
No, I'm not going to give them any of them.
Everything's going to have.
I feel like you're gonna say yes to this.
Yeah, I think that he's spoken about it and the way he wanted to be presented in more of that kind of Roman Reigns way, where every big match feels special. And last year was a number of examples of where that didn't happen. So you mentioned Forbidden Door. I went insane over the MJF on 3 days notice or 3 days promotion.
So fucking stupid.
And that's not the way that you should treat Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega is, arguably the biggest draw in the company. You can argue between him and Mox over years, but he is that man that makes big matches feel special.
Yes.
That is different. It's a different energy. He provides a different energy. And it's something that really differentiates them as a company. And that storytelling element and that attention to detail, it might be passed down now. We might see more of that in guys like, Strickland and Page, who, and you can argue, Jericho has some influence on that as well. But he is so critical to the identity of this company, and it's never magnified in the way it should be.
But I don't think that Tony Khan values that level of intricate, thoughtful storytelling or detailed storytelling. Like, I think that's
his mindset is much more towards the Danielson kind of punk style of thinking, for sure.
Right.
But it's been the most successful things that AEW ever do is when that kind of thing is at the forefront. We're talking about a pay-per-view at the start of this show, which was headlined by something built like that. Built out their hard work more than where the company thought that was going to get to. So, I just I think if this company was more focused around his image or focused on his vision of the way wrestling is, then they would be a lot better off than what they are currently. And that's not to say they're not a success, but it's to say that I just think that would be a stronger path. And he should be emphasized because his achievements and the way that he became a draw. Look at how much they're trying to get Ospreay into a draw with the kind of constant current push, and compare that to the way that Omega was able to turn those numbers around and do those numbers on the independents, do those numbers in New Japan, to do those live numbers, to come in and be a TV kind of draw within a very short period of time where others were unable or are unable to do so. So what he does is special. And when he comes back, I'm going to go with when, because I think I'm very hopeful. You need to treat that as one of the biggest things, because not making him the biggest, not pushing him as the biggest babyface in the company when he was the top guy really last year was a huge mistake. And I hope that, they realize that you have to get what you can out of him with his time. He's got to look after his body as well. And, you've got to be careful with him. But so whatever you do get, whatever those moments are, you've got to make them special. And that needs to happen.
Well, this is where you wonder about like, Wrestle Dynasty and the stuff they're going to do in Japan in January. How much of that is going to be something that, Tony Khan's almost going to be forced into doing. Because, I think New Japan, if they have their druthers, would present him in the way he wants to be presented. Right.
We saw
like
that.
I said, they did
when he went to the Tokyo Dome, and which wasn't even shown on AEW television, by the way, during a period where he wasn't even talking on AEW television. That Tokyo Dome and the way his presentation was, and it was like a shock to your system because you remember this is Kenny Omega.
Right.
This is Kenny Omega. And he is just unlike anybody else in wrestling. And why would you not want to present that in your company like that? I don't get it. I've never got it.
I've give you a list of reasons, but
I know.
In a private conversation. Anyway.
But no, so for me, he needs to be special, and he needs to be presented as special when he's back, and they need to treat him in the way that they treat Bryan Danielson or Jon Moxley or Max or any of these other guys, and you do wonder. It's kind of weird that we're talking about, again, the people that aren't kind of making their success in other companies that have these issues. But yeah, just fix it. Just fix it this time. Looking for hoping to see him back. If he's at Wrestle Dynasty, that would be incredible.
Oof.
Yeah, we should try and catch that one, I think. So on to
this is going to be so much fun. I've been looking forward to discussing this topic.
So on to Stranger Things. A lawsuit was filed a week and a half ago. Do you want to talk about this first? Because you're always much better explaining this stuff than me.
I do a linear report fairly well. Okay, so let's go back to the summer of 2023, Trish, when Collision debuts, and the announced team is Nigel McGuinness on color commentary and Kevin Kelly as the play-by-play, right? Kevin Kelly was someone who was with New Japan Pro Wrestling for a period of time and got snapped up to be the Collision commentary team. This deteriorated fairly rapidly. Kevin Kelly had a tough time. Let's put it this way. Both Nigel McGuinness and Kevin Kelly, I think for those of us that watched Collision in the beginning, had a difficult time at the start. Neither one of them seemed to be particularly familiar with AEW storylines. They struggled at times to talk their way through matches. Kevin Kelly could not pronounce Andrade El Idolo if you paid him, which apparently they were doing, and he still couldn't do it. And as a result, it was a rough start. Nigel McGuinness got better. And has definitely become someone who is an enjoyable person to listen to on color commentary, both on the pay-per-views and on Collision on a regular basis. Kevin Kelly did not get any better at all. Okay. And a lot of this ended up becoming an issue when Kevin Kelly started promoting a movie called Sound of Freedom across his social media. Now, Sound of Freedom as a film was a fairly innocuous movie about sex trafficking, like a weird, fucked up movie about sex trafficking. One of the things that's important about it is that it was pushed very heavily by members of a QAnon conspiracy group. And those of you who are not familiar with QAnon, God bless you. You're lucky. I don't know if you want to look it up. Essentially, like stay in ignorance, okay? But QAnon people believe that there is a legion of children that are being sex trafficked across the country, specifically for a type of hormone that elite people on the Democratic liberal side are harvesting this hormone so that they can live long, like real fucking lizard people bullshit, okay? So don't look it up, okay? So Kevin Kelly pushed this pretty prominently on his social media at the time. People raised an eyebrow. It was weird. It kind of got moved on because there's a lot of fucking weirdos in wrestling, let's face it. Then Ian Riccaboni, who is the Ring of Honor play-by-play guy and has been for a long time, someone apparently very well liked in wrestling by many people, went on the Voices of Wrestling Discord, and unfortunately for him, forgot that it is a private community that is sort of public, and he made a bunch of comments on the Discord about Kevin Kelly. And they were sort of sad. I don't have the right in front of me, but effectively at the time, it was sort of a sadness that he felt that he essentially said that they originally wanted Ian Riccaboni for the job as Collision play-by-play, but after he got let go when Ring of Honor looked like it was closing, he made the decision that he wanted to stay with his family and that he wanted to not work weekends. And so he said, thank you so much. I'm not going to take it. You should look at Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly's a great guy. You should give him the job. They gave Kevin Kelly the job, right? So Ian Riccaboni said that he was really disappointed because he's someone who'd recently run for, I think, school council, PTA, or he was whatever it is, like he was involved with his school district very heavily, and he felt that Kevin Kelly pushing QAnon conspiracy theories with the Sound of Freedom was not a great idea. This got published because we always know that if somebody says something about somebody, there's always going to be somebody who's going to fucking screenshot that shit and share it everywhere they can, right? So Ian Riccaboni's comments got published places, and Kevin Kelly started to lose his mind. And people sort of questioned Kevin Kelly and said, are you being QAnon? And Kevin Kelly never actually came out and said, I am not QAnon. And I think you can go back and look at screenshots for days. They're everywhere. He never actually said no. What his response was, don't you care about children? Are you a pedophile? Do you care? Like, it was fucking crazy, this shit, right? This is how fucking down the rabbit hole we are, people. Okay. Kevin Kelly also was apparently making comments on Collision. He got into a bunch of arguments with people. He didn't do a good job. Again, he was still not doing a good job with the commentary, to the point where they brought in Tony Schiavone to be the play-by-play guy on Collision. And the desk was an extremely awkward, for a period of time, three-man: Kevin Kelly, Tony Schiavone, and Nigel McGuinness. Eventually, Kevin Kelly was sent home, and eventually Kevin Kelly was fired. He's like there's 3 or 4 people in AEW have been fired, and he was effectively let go, right? One of the it's worthwhile to point out that the weekend he was let go was also the weekend that he had a complete meltdown over Twitter. Like there's screenshots out there where he just kind of went nuts. And since he's been fired, I believe it was March where he was finally fired, he has been all over the place talking about how he was going to sue. He's going to fucking sue, because we all know that if a white man who lost his job over saying something inappropriate, he feels like the government owes him a job, he's going to fucking sue somebody. So he's claimed he was going to sue. I swear to God, I never thought a lawsuit would be filed because I didn't think a lawyer would take this, but I forgot that Stephen P. New exists in the world. And so Stephen P. New was very excited to hook up with Kevin Kelly. And so last week they filed this lawsuit it was 2 weeks ago. It was on a Wednesday, right? Or it came out, it was before the pay-per-view. It came out on the Friday or whatever it was. And Kevin Kelly was joined in the lawsuit by the Tate Twins. And if you've forgotten who the Tate Twins are, they are the boys who used to be Dalton Castle's guys, right? And they were also let go in that weird fucking period last year during WrestleMania week where somebody convinced Tony Khan to let go of people that I think were not worth the money at the time, and he did, and then there was an outcry about it and he walked it back. And in the process of walking it back, Tony Khan made the really stupid decision of going into a press conference and saying that they fired the boys not because of budget reasons, but because the boys didn't show up for work a couple times. So this is just, again, like I said, this is the kind of like bullshit, like fandom, like, you know, fights between people that you wouldn't realize these are adult people with money, but whatever. So Stephen P. New filed this lawsuit. It was announced on a Brian Last Associated Wrestling website. And Stephen P. New's lawsuit is that, I read the whole lawsuit, it's fucking fascinating. Essentially, Kevin Kelly got fired because he was too edgy for AEW. And the Tate Twins should never have been fired, and it was really mean of Tony Khan to say wrong things about them. The Tate Twins have not been able to get work since they got fired, specifically because of how Tony Khan spoke about them. That's the argument. And Kevin Kelly has not gotten work as an announcer specifically because of how Tony Khan and Ian Riccoboni, who was also named as a defendant in the lawsuit, spoke about him. But interesting in this is that within the contents of the lawsuit, Kevin Kelly argues, or Stephen P. New argues, and it's also worth pointing out that Tony Khan is misspelled in this. There's like a bunch of errors in the lawsuit filing itself, where they say that Ring of Honor since 2002 has had at least 30 events in the state of Pennsylvania, which is ridiculous because it's like at least 30,000. I feel like at this point, it's just dumb. But Kevin Kelly says that Ian Riccoboni had been trying to get him fired, that Ian Riccoboni wanted his job and was trying to get him fired from the beginning. He caused a defamation lawsuit. It's a whole thing. Kevin Kelly also claims that he yelled at the lady in HR and that he's not QAnon. Right. So the lawsuit was, as far as I'm aware, the first time he actually said, I am not a QAnon believer. And he claimed that being associated with QAnon was a negative on his part. So, Trish, anything that I left out, anything, like, again, it's worth pointing out how absolutely ridiculous this is. I don't think any other attorney on earth would have accepted this case, but this man exists.
Do you know, I feel really vindicated for putting Japanese commentary on for the last 5 years.
When you're watching New Japan.
Yeah. No, the serious point is, so this was filed in state court.
Yes.
In Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Because Kelly and Riccoboni are both residents of Pennsylvania, and they also claim because Tony Khan made the comments about the Tate Twins during
a Ring of Honor, during a press scrum that he was in Ring of Honor at the time.
Yes, for that Ring of Honor show that was in Philadelphia that weekend, WrestleMania weekend. Yeah. So that may move if the defamation part of the lawsuit comes out, because AEWs are officed even in Delaware and based in Jacksonville, and arbitration is said to be in Florida. The most likely outcome is that these cases go to arbitration. So that's the first thing. They have to argue that this can't be solved through arbitration, which was written into their contracts, and they have to demonstrate that these contracts were somehow kind of agreed to under duress. And there's been it's critical for this because Kelly Klein, who was also represented by Stephen P. New against Ring of Honor, who had numerous things in that lawsuit, ranging from kind of harassment to kind of unsafe working conditions. Her case was heard, and they decided that it would go to arbitration because it was clear that what she signed up to in the agreement in terms of arbitration was, written in very simple language, was easy to understand, and there was no reason to not say that that's so. So it just went to arbitration. So nothing else was kind of looked at within that lawsuit, and that's probably the most likely outcome here.
Yeah.
But we will see what happens in that regard. A couple other things was it was released. It wasn't filed on Labor Day, but it was released
Correct.
on Labor Day, which happened to what was it, 2-year anniversary of CM Punk All Out, and people recognize the name Stephen P. New from the interactions with Chris Jericho around Christmas. And the defamation bit is probably the thing that will get kind of thrown out the quickest. Because you have to prove that there's malice that in terms of that reputation. I was listening to Tom Martin over at The Torch, who has a legal background, so he was kind of the first one I actually wanted to hear talk about this from a wrestling perspective. And he talked about, there needs to be a falsehood, and he doesn't see that. He thinks it's more of an opinion, and he thinks that this lawsuit is more about grievance than having, a chance of success. And I think that's kind of that's what it reads as. And when Stephen Pino went onto YouTube and started to discuss it, which is insane to me, in my mind, why would you, if as the filing lawyer, go out and put this onto YouTube? But the person on House Kayfabe that was interviewing him asked him, is this about getting to Discovery? And that could be either to get a settlement in a similar to way that MLW did with the Tubi thing, when Stephanie McMahon had interfered in that deal, and WWE did not want that to go to Discovery, so they settled. Or is it just because you want to ask whatever you want in Discovery? And and he kind of went, well, it's about justice. But his co-host obviously completely believed that it was about getting to Discovery, so you could ask whatever. So in terms of the motivations, there's going to be questions on that. And the way he went after JR, who was, head of talent relations in WWE. So when you're talking about independent contractors and employees and that kind of, they probably are misclassified. That is a long-standing thing that is probably true. And, you've got to look at an AEW. There are a number of people that are either on dual contracts. So it's been mentioned in contracts. I think Chris Jericho and Jon Moxley have both had the fact that they are employees of the company in the press release of their contracts. Yeah. It would not surprise me if other people were also employees of the company that are not as well known. In fact, there's one that I absolutely can tell you is an employee of the company that's not someone that people may think of. So there is that thing of changing at the top, but not as much underneath. And because of the level of control that's asserted on these contractors, they are employees, but that's something that's going to, if you're looking for a class action suit, and that's what feels to me, is that they want to bring something where they have more people, you're not going to get that here. No. This isn't going to change anything here. And especially when it's being brought by, a lawsuit that's written in this way. So I think there is a genuine issue in terms of how they are kind of classified, but this isn't something that's going to make any impact there.
I think that you can, and this is one of the stupid things that comes out of these types of internet arguments, is that people are like, don't you think arbitration is bad? Don't you think wrestlers should be like, yes, everyone thinks all that fucking stuff, but like, this is the type of dispute that is more something that should go to arbitration, a dispute between two people. And one of the things that's fascinating about the lawsuit is that Kevin Kelly argues that he was told that Ian Riccaboni was disciplined for his comments and what he wrote about in Voices of Wrestling Discord, but that he wasn't told what the punishment was. And so therefore, because he wasn't told what the punishment was, he doesn't know that it actually happened. And that's kind of like, I don't know that I've encountered any experience in human resources, in a human resources world where they've told you what the punishment is or what the other person has been, unless they've been fired, what the rebuke has been. It's not done.
I can't recall that. And I've gone through many processes with HR and in terms of, giving punishments effectively or even dismissing people. So, and I've never had that experience where we've then gone, no, that's not how it works. So
it also
it's kind of a very strange thing to ask.
It also kind of negates part of the lawsuit, because if your argument is that he wasn't punished, but then you're like, well, he was punished, but I wasn't told exactly what it was. Well, it's like, now the point of what you're trying to argue is sort of moot there, right? And this to me does seem like the kind of thing that's designed more for arbitration than, sexual assault and sex trafficking, just to put it, in a nutshell. But I think one of the things about this is that you have effectively the worst people in wrestling banding together to it's sort of got shades of the Hausman stuff with Jericho, right? Where it's like, I'm going to smear somebody's reputation. Right.
It feels like the next part, effectively, in some ways.
Right.
Yep.
I'm going to do this not because of what it means or because I want to make the industry better, but because I might have an opportunity to go into discovery. God for in the miracle that I end up with a judge that says that this shouldn't be thrown out or pushed to arbitration. And I can ask if you have ever had an employee sign an NDA, right? And it's also worth pointing out that Tony Khan is an absolute fucking moron for saying anything negative about any of his fucking employees in a press conference, regardless of how annoyed.
We said that all the time.
And we said it at the fucking time.
We said, "What are you doing?" We literally said, "What are you doing?"
Deal with the fact that sometimes there's going to be shit said that isn't true, okay? And that you're just going to have to fucking eat it. A bunch of people had to eat it at other times in your company, and now sometimes you have to just fucking eat it, Tony, right? I'm sorry. I'm sure there was a bunch of shit that you know about that happened with different wrestlers, and you're pissed off that people are defending them when they don't know the full story. Geez, that's a funny story we've never heard fucking before in AEW. God. I don't know. It's the whole thing is just dumb. It's a waste of time and energy. And it just feels like a situation designed to get headlines for, like I said, some of the worst fucking people in wrestling.
Yep, that's pretty much it. But I thought, we should cover it.
No, I agree.
Yeah. Anyway, right. Shall we move on?
I love
Let's do some WWE stuff. So SmackDown moved back to USA on Friday night, and that led to a lot of questions on, how successful was SmackDown for Fox? So Fox had SmackDown from 2019 to 2024, a deal that was worth $205 million across for each year out of 5 years, 1.025 billion. It's crazy. Cumulative. During the same time period, USA also paid $265 million a year for 5 years of Raw, up from $150 million that they paid for both previously. USA had actually offered $360 million for both across 10 years. So that is kind of interesting, because you think those 10-year things that have come out, like with Netflix now, that's something that USA were looking at 5 years ago. And they thought that the bidding for SmackDown would not cross 200 million. And once it did, they kind of decided, we'll focus on keeping Raw because that's essential to our carriage fees. And this was, this was a deal that relied on Fox thinking that they could bring greater exposure to WWE, and by having them on a linear platform, having them such a big network like Fox, and then being able to advertise and cross-promote them with things like the NFL. I think if you watch Fox football on a Sunday, you've seen many an advert for SmackDown across the last 5 years. And they thought that it would create this second boom period, and that their expectation was that they could do kind of 1.0 in the demo, which was a figure they only reached twice, in fact. The second episode was at 1.0 exactly. And even if you look at the loss in TV viewership over the last 5 years, probably this year was the first, or late last year was the first time that it probably matched up across those 5 years. So, the question is can it be seen as a successful deal? Or are they kind of going back to USA with their tail between their legs?
So this is one of those ones where I think it's clear that Fox was disappointed with what they got from SmackDown. I don't think that there's any argument that can be made that they were happy with it. And it seems like they were pretty disappointed with it almost from the very beginning. There was a lot of talk about it being a loss leader for Fox in terms of the advertisement never getting to where they wanted it to be. And it did, it was pretty consistently the biggest drawing in the demo show on Friday nights, but it wasn't doing the kind of numbers, like you said, that Fox sort of estimated that it would. So the funny thing about it is they were not successful, but they were asking for what, 40% more in this deal?
50% more.
50,
They wanted
50% more.
50. Yeah.
Right. So, and Fox, it was pretty clear from the get-go that Fox was not even going to consider bidding on them in terms of, wanting to continue the relationship. Right. So that said, they were, consistently winning their night in the demo on network television. And they did, especially in the last year or so, do a slightly better job in the rating. But I think if you want to say, was it successful from Fox's perspective? I think the answer has to be no. Right?
Yep. Yeah, because, they look at it and they are not, they're not controlled by carriage fees. They don't need to do that. It's all about advertisement rates.
Correct.
And they looked at it and said that the average SmackDown watcher earns, $48,000, $47,900 in 2023, and only 18% graduated college. So that restricts the price that they can charge for advertising. And then you add that onto the fact that their viewership was less than they expected. So from a TV perspective, it was a very successful show in terms of demo rating and winning the night. But it never lived up to the expectations of that boom period that they thought that they would impact. And it's funny because you look at it and you think this is probably the most popular WWE we've been in 20 years.
Right.
But it still wasn't up to the level of expectation that they thought that they could bring across by just having this show on Fox. And the thing that makes me question is what does that teach us about WWE moving to Netflix? Because there is this expectation that when it does move to Netflix, that it will open up WWE to greater markets, to kind of more viewership, to viewers that may previously have not, had any kind of relationship with the product. But this was a very similar line of thinking to what Fox were kind of saying at the time. So is that realistic, or is this something where we are kind of already looking ahead in a way that, in a year's time, we may see similar presentation? And, it's important to note that Netflix have outs in this deal.
Yes.
And the way that this deal accumulates over the years, the escalators, it won't be to midway through the deal where they're paying anywhere close to what USA were playing for Raw. So, yeah, and you could see it with Fox. I think there was some interesting. So not just the comments from kind of Lakeland Murdoch and like that in terms around their value. And could you imagine? It's WBD. No one ever makes these comments about AEW, and this was Fox basically going, "Yeah, this isn't worthless to our network in terms of cost ratio." And there was the FS1 show. They did the backstage show that saw the return of CM Punk to WWE on Fox that was very swiftly kind of pulled, so that kind of supporting content. So that was very early on. So you can tell how quickly they decided that their investment was not going to be found on. But
I just think one of the things that's so fascinating about this, and this is probably where you could argue that WWE's success has been tremendous, is that they've sort of convinced people that they're a success, right? Like, they've presented a lot of what they've done as a deal to the point where, people are like, well, they're a huge success. And it's like, well, they are. Like, I don't think you can argue that they are, but they're also not in some weirdly specific ways that seem to never get any traction, right? Like, this is a great deal for them to move off of Fox and go to Netflix. But, like, it's not really but the negatives, like you said, just aren't sort of the coverage of how this goes. I don't know. I find that stuff talking about this as the ratings for Smackdown on USA dropped and they got a 0.55 and 1.7 million.
0.5 what?
Yep.
0.7.55 for the debut.
1.7 and a 0.55 for the debut.
Oh, I guess we know where we got no fast nationals now. That's
Yep.
And we got baseball playoff season coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a weak number for the debut for me. Yes, it's Friday night. Yes, Fridays are a challenge, but you promoted this thing for 3-4 weeks, and it'd be interesting how SmackDown does this year, because we're seeing a slight difference in some of the live numbers as well going into fall, because last year they had John Cena for most of the autumn. So That's an interesting one, and I can see the sense of them keeping it on Friday. A lot of people thought it would move, but if they are getting the NBA on Comcast, it would make absolute sense to keep that on Friday, because you may have programming on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, depending on how that deal works on USA. So that makes sense. And for the moment, they've got Raw on the cheap as well.
Yeah.
So they're dropping that to 2 hours for the foreseeable, which will up the Raw rating because they have such a huge loss in the third hour, but also could mean that they could use 10 p.m. as a piggyback slot, a lead out sort of thing to promote something else that may be on USA past January. That would make sense, to me as thinking about programming. But yeah, that SmackDown rating's really interesting.
That was I brought it up because I was like, she's gonna want to hear this.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that, but that explains it. I did wonder when there wasn't no Fast Nationals where that level would sit. So maybe we'll establish in the next few weeks and months what the new normal is in that regard. So that will be interesting. But yeah, that is lower than I expected for sure. Their other aim as well. So they never actually put an aim on this debut show in terms of viewership, but for the NXT debut on CW, they keep telling Dave that they're aiming for 1 million viewers.
Yes.
Which, when you look at the head-to-head episode they had with Dynamite last year, I could see it's a possibility if you chuck a John Cena on it and that sort of thing. But it's also going up against the vice presidential debate. But then again, they went up against the presidential debate and it did nothing to their numbers this week. So who knows? So it's a strange viewership in that regard.
It is. It's one of those things that they just don't seem to be impacted by anything that happens in the world. Like there's the people, the NXT fans are watching NXT. Like the apocalypse is going on. Zombies are headed down the street, and it's like NXT is on. We got to check out what's happening against Chase U, right?
We always joke that TNA were going to be the only thing to survive an apocalypse, but actually, it's the NXT viewership.
It's nuts. I think
crazy.
I think for non-US folks, it's worth pointing out that yes, the CW is technically a network television. Is it network television channel in that it is not necessarily a pay channel, but the CW is one of these sort of second wave of it's a combination of UPN and WB, the WB network, that merged after they had a lot of trouble because they were like the post Fox additional networks. And so they're not one specific channel across the country. They're sort of a hodgepodge of channels.
And they're not in every location, are they?
They're not in every market.
More homes in USA.
Correct. So they're technically network television, but they're not network television the way that like Fox is network television. So it'll be interesting to see if they can hit 1 million viewers. They're having a hell of a time selling tickets for these live shows that they're trying to put on. So they just recently moved the St. Louis show, where they were going to have St. Louis at, I don't remember was it at the Enterprise Center?
Enterprise Center, yeah.
Right. They moved it to they moved it to a much smaller venue. And they had sold 3,000 tickets.
Yeah, it was weird because just before it moved, it dropped to 2,100. So it was either things that came back on the map, or maybe they offered up refunds at that point. They sent them out. I'm not sure which one that was, but yeah. So that one's completely moved, and they haven't shied away from doing it. They just do it, which we've seen them do before. They did it with Money in the Bank in 2022, and they just moved that out of the stadium straight into an arena. And we've seen them cancel house shows, so they don't have an issue with doing that, and they don't get the perception stuff that AEW has. And maybe it says something about not worrying about that stuff and just being like, we need to do what's best for our business. They've also got debut at the Allstate Arena in Chicago, which has 6,172 out with CM Punk.
Advertised for a while.
Yeah, so we're not we'll see what that number ends up, but it's not this instant sellout thing as some were claiming it might be. But it's funny with the autumn one, isn't it? Because all this stuff about market value and his new big contract, and they're like, okay, yeah, and really, they're owning shows that they have on the road that do kind of numbers have been their pay-per-views. No Mercy did 6,899 in Denver, Halloween Havoc's at 4,090 for Hershey, Pennsylvania. So it does show you, sometimes we make light of how difficult, and TNA should have taught us this lesson about how difficult it is to tour the weekly programs on that you do. And also, the other thing I noticed is when we talk about dynamic pricing, so we've been looking at the way these shows have just been priced low, which is the opposite of WWE's general strategy, like we saw in Vancouver last week for Survivor Series, which have ridiculous prices, but they sell.
They sold.
And you can do that when they're hot. When you have kind of that momentum, you can do that. But it also shows you it's about assigned value. So people have to think that is the value that's worth for dynamic pricing to work. It was very interesting that they shoved that information out on the same day as that on sale. It's the political way of burying bad news, isn't it? But on that subject, on terms of live events, Mark Shapiro was at a conference this week, and he talked about cutting the amount of events for WWE. He said,
"Yep,
we're taking our low margin, marginally profitable events, untelevised events that Vince put in place to grow the brand. You're taking the show on the road. We're going to every city we can to grow the brand. Well, the WWE brand, while we still have to grow it, is on fire right now. We don't need to carry these marginally profitable events. Andrew Schreiner, our CFO, and Nick Khan at WWE have been hands-on involved with cutting back these events, trimming these events. What was 300 events last year will be roughly 250 this year, and next year will be close to 200. And this is quite a substantial change from the traditional business model, and we've already seen it in place. We talked about last time around, there's no kind of fall autumn house shows in the US.
Right.
The next US tour will be the holiday tour, which they do very well from each year in terms of financially. And the only real tours in terms of house shows are all international.
Yep.
So there is a European tour in November, and that has been extended. And this makes a difference. It makes a difference for talent, because when you look at the kind of the balance, this means that talent are on the road far less. It takes less kind of taxing on their bodies, and it also means for WWE talent, this isn't a day where they still pay them individually for house shows. They now get kind of a collective number, the same way that you do in AEW for merch and live events and so forth. But in WWE, they were still paying for hotels and travel.
Yes.
And this is predominantly for US domestic. So when they go abroad, travel is taken care of for them. For big events like a SummerSlam or a WrestleMania, it's taken care of. But for, accommodation is, but for these shows, every single one of them, they're not being paid individually for the house show. They have a collective contract, but they are paying expenses. They're all basically getting a pay rise without getting a pay rise in financial terms. So, the downsides of it is you have less people working. But here's the thing, right? So when I look at AEW, who are probably in the 5 years of AEW, I look at, and I wonder if you'll dispute this, but I think the two most improved in-ring guys are Adam Page and MJF.
I don't disagree.
In the 5 years, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the guys that have become great in-ring workers.
Yeah. That weren't already. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So not say anyone else, but no, but in terms of actual across that 5 year period, how often have they worked in AEW? Especially in the last few years, right?
Yeah.
And we can discuss that separately. But that shows I think it makes a difference maybe if you're coming up through their system. But if you are that level of talent, I think you'll find that level of talent anyway.
Right.
I think you'll find your way to that level. But it will certainly change the way that they perform. And we'll see if that has any effect on that. But it's that their business model is completely moving. Does this change in the business models leave opportunities for AEW? Potentially, if they want to make the most of them. Going to break the rule as well as we're towards the end. We said we wouldn't talk about the deal.
We got to talk about the deal a little bit. We were going to wait until the deal got announced, but
Yeah, we can talk about a couple of different rumors. So the first one being the Fox rumor, which feels like more likely FS1 than the Fox network itself. Something that Dave said isn't closed yet. And it shouldn't be that surprising. So as much as Fox as a network were done with SmackDown, and you could look at that as maybe a failure for wrestling at a whole, they still wanted to do a deal with Tubi, with their streaming service, with MLW, the one we mentioned earlier that Stephanie nixed. And so it wouldn't be that surprising if they offered something to AEW, and AEW have trademarked Shockwave, and Tony in the press scrum was very much going to journalists, ask me about the deal, ask me about it, and kind of going 5th anniversary show. He's
basically told you when he's going to tell you what's going on,
and he's not the most subtle man existing. Bless him. But
no.
He's also illustrating that they've been commissioning all sorts of different research in terms of market share and rate of spend and that sort of thing. So that kind of was an indication before even this Fox thing got mentioned that he was looking outside. And it was funny because you've got WWE feeding to people now that instead of no deal, and it's a bad deal, or no one wants them, as this information came out. But the Fox thing, I think there's a couple of things that is kind of important in that, is that it kind of illustrates that exclusivity kind of stuff with WBD is kind of done. That was added with Collision last year, and that would be good, because I think, for me, I don't know about yourself, but I think that the loss of Dark and the Road 2s and that sort of thing has really hurt kind of that progression into the week and that lead in.
I think
you get far more out of Dark than you do out of Ring of Honor.
I agree with you. I think I think you get more out of Dark. I think you get more out of the Road 2s. I think it helps people think about their characters and think about their character journey and think about what the feud is about. It provides like a little bit more, you almost have to think about it before you do it in a way that like it feels more thrown together now, right? And I also think it's important to point out, like, we talk a lot about AEW in terms of the business stuff and what's going wrong and what's going right. It's still the top second or third rated TV show in all of television, cable television, for the week consistently, right? And, WWE's success, which is good, should not overwhelm AEW's success, which is at times, they've been struggling, but they're still in a really good spot. And of course, other networks want their content, right? Like, it's one of those things that just seems kind of, I think sometimes people either overreact to criticism or underreact to criticism. And it's like, there's these narratives that get placed where it's like AEW is a dumpster fire. Like, well, they're clearly not a dumpster fire. Like, they're doing pretty good. They're in many ways very successful, despite the problems that they've had over the last however many, months or years, or however cold the product feels, right?
You've got to split the kind of issues or things to discuss around a creativity and around a popularity and in terms of financial success. Right. They're all three different things. And in this aspect, as a property, as a TV property, we talk about the difference in terms of the average kind of viewer earnings and in terms of ad rates, or Chris Harrington was talking about the lead in, they tune in from in terms of lead in as they come into the program, and in terms of the value of like picture in picture and that sort of thing. So they offer things that other kind of products cannot offer, and probably at a lower price. So there are absolute reasons for other networks to kind of take a look at them. I think there's a benefit as well in terms of having relationships with other kind of companies other than WBD. And the fact that WBD are tumultuous,
a hot mess, like
so but then you also have the downside that Fox, as we've seen with WWE, are a lot more vocal and have a lot more expectation. So maybe they wouldn't for something that was just like secondary programming on FS1, but I think there's benefits of having a relationship, when building a relationship with another media company.
And you can see it already now, like from the fucking dumbass assholes like Bischoff or whoever. Like, don't fall for this bullshit where it's like, oh well, they would never put them on Fox. Like, well, FS1, they'll put anything on FS1. Like, any other cable
network.
It's a net, like any other cable channel being like, yeah, we totally want your programming, is a freaking success for AEW. So like, don't buy into any of that like changed expectation stuff. Like, I don't think anybody expected Fox to go back into wrestling on the network immediately after losing SmackDown. So
it's crazy though, because you look at like baseball, not every game is on ESPN or Fox or on FS1, so, and they're having trouble getting some games from some of the teams anywhere. Yeah, that's been a massive issue this year with the collapse of a lot of small organizations showing, local team games. So yeah, we shouldn't underestimate, how successful, they pay off these deals they'll be. But the other talk has been around pay-per-view on Max.
Yes.
And the only other thing I want to say on that, because we said we wouldn't break too much, and I don't really feel like kind of going through everything, going, the value, I don't care until we get the deal. But I do wonder if, people say that Peacock had an impact on WWE viewership, and we never really saw that in the first years. But once they got, hotter, in the aspect, Mike's going to kill me if I keep using the word hot. But once they did get hotter, it did help that people could see those key moments and they were more accessible. And I do wonder that if you have AEW pay-per-views on Max, that because especially with their issues that they have with follow-up, that the greater access will mean that more people will see their top talent in their kind of key moments.
Yes.
And that could be of more benefit to them in terms of the talent and the company, being that the pay-per-views are pretty much the top part of, or, probably the thing that is still the most popular amongst the AEW fan base, being that having greater access. Well, I think that could benefit more than WWE putting their content onto the WWE network or Peacock in the past.
I'm definitely someone who's believed that a WWE on Peacock had a huge impact on them. I think that AEW giving itself an opportunity to, or being given an opportunity to reach a wider audience across a different platform can only help them, right? Like having your content in different locations is only going to be beneficial. So I think given the kind of conversations that Tony Khan was having about the deal, it seems clear that this was something he very much wanted, and it does feel like that was the agreed upon thing that got the deal over the finish line. Yeah. But we'll see.
And I think the key is that from a viewer's perspective, it's hard because from a TV perspective, it's content farming aspect. They want content for each of these places. Right. But from a viewer's perspective, I think we want that content to not be missable, to be something that we want to tune in for. And I think there is an issue. You see how I'm sideways?
You're doing a good job. These transitions are chef's kiss. I love it.
That's like that's half a victory lap. There we go. But no, there's times at the moment where you can miss over half of AEW television, and if you watch it, it's fun. You can enjoy the matches for what they are, but they are not essential for following any of the stories or your investment, so they are missable. And I do wonder about having more of your content as missable than unmissable is an issue. And with that in mind, our friend of the pod, Blue Jam, from our Discord, wrote us a question about Collision this week, which, if you saw the lineup for Collision and you saw the poster, were definitely two different things. So they ask, is the general lack of stars on Collision due to contracts signed pre its existence, meaning people couldn't really be made to work these extra tapings? And if so, any idea if new contracts being signed have added date requirements so Collision can feature more main event talent moving forward and more major angles? So the first thing I'd say about this is that I think, if you speak to people on AEW, the first thing that will say is that there is an effort to protect Dynamite, and that they think that having some of the major people just be on Dynamite and some of these major angles just be on Dynamite means they protect Dynamite's rating and the interest in that, because that is their flagship. Right. That is what carries these deals. You can argue whether you think that's a good thing or not, but that is something that they do talk about. There are a number of people on limited dates, probably far more than you think. However, a lot of these ones on limited dates aren't, you use all the dates and then we don't work. They are, we use these dates and then you pay us for next set of dates. The only one that was outside of that was like Bandido, but I'm not sure how that would work now because of the changes in his Mexican company as well. They would all, if you said to them, okay, we'll pay, we'll exercise that clause in your contract and we'll pay you and we want you to work Collision. Most of these people will work Collision. It's not a case of people going, no, I'm not working. But a lot of them aren't even asked. It's not someone going, oh no, I won't do it. They aren't asked. But there are reasons for that, I think. Some of that is because this was quite a big change to kind of scheduling. And we looked at just a minute ago at WWE reducing their scheduling. And then AEW would have, if you were going to work both shows in 1 week, for example, then you would work, you fly out Tuesday, it could be Monday, depending on location. Do that show Wednesday. No point flying home on Thursday. So you might fly or travel to the next town Friday and then have that show Saturday and then travel home Sunday. So it's kind of brutal. It's very difficult to do that sort of thing on a regular basis. If you're used to working kind of the 3-day-a-week travel schedule. And I think that he thinks it's so much an advantage over WWE that they're now losing, that they're kind of careful around that. But I think also it just requires planning, right? And
which I don't think it's not been a strong suit of theirs recently.
Yeah. If you film a pre-tape the week before and they miss Dynamite, then they can work Collision. But then you get the issues of being on that B show and a lower kind of viewership, and does that affect the way that your stars are viewed? But I think that's fine. If you were just putting on Collision like they did in the Residency, right? And it's in a small venue and it's your TV viewership and they can choose whether to watch or not, and you consider it missable content, that's fine. But what you cannot do is advertise, and they did this week in Dayton, Ohio.
Brutal.
Which was on a Thursday night, so you can say that negates some of the logistic elements of having to have people travel out twice or stay around. I thought the whole idea of Thursday nights was literally you put more talent on the show.
Apparently not.
But they advertised Mox, Danielson, Page, Jericho, Willow, Thunder Rosa, FTR, and Pac. And who was the only people on that lineup that made the card? Yeah, our favorite friends of Tunnel Talks, FTR. So that's not good enough. That's not acceptable from a live viewership perspective. And especially, the last time they went to Dayton, Ohio, they ran Moxley, Adam Page free. They had, Max promo. They had the Kesha match, a Clay match, a Jay match, and Samoa Joe versus Darby for the TNT title. If you wonder why people don't come back to these shows the second time out,
or don't buy tickets in advance.
Yeah. Exactly. And why pay-per-views are the one thing that seems to hold up in ticket-wise. Well, guess why pay-per-views hold up? It's because they know they're going to see these people. You could go to a Wrestling Revolver show who run Dayton, Ohio quite regularly, and you can see Moxley. You can see grizzled young vets. You can see half the Impact roster. You could probably work out. You might even get a bigger star with Moxley than you did on any of them shows, and you could probably meet him. Like, where is the value in that? So I don't think that this is a talent not wanting to work problem. I think this is a planning issue and a way of stating what they think Collision is. But I do think that it was a huge part of their original kind of identity in terms of their relationship with their fan base, and that they shouldn't take them for granted, especially when there's all these markets now that WWE are giving up. Some of them are rural, which aren't great for AEW. They do much better in kind of urban locations, but there is opportunities there. So you need to deliver what you advertise.
I agree, and I think that it's one of the biggest problems that they're currently having in terms of, like you said, keeping audience, right? Like, I have a couple dates upcoming where I could go to a Collision and I'm like, do I want to run the risk? Like, I'm not going to buy a ticket now. Like, it's something I might consider, but if it's something I have to travel for, that makes it a lot more difficult, right? Because then it's like, oh, okay, now I know what the card is on the Thursday before, but I'm not going to travel for it. It's not, I don't know. The thought process needs to be there, and it's just not there currently.
Yeah, it just needs some more effort put in. Because, even if you don't want them on TV because you don't want to dilute Dynamite, fine. We'll do something after. God, even get them out to do a promo. You're in Dayton, Ohio. Why is Jon Moxley not doing something? Get a signing, whatever. They used to do this stuff. So
do a dark match for Christ's sakes.
Yeah, it's not going to kill anybody. You know, and so it just needs some looking at. I don't think that's a talent issue at all. Be brave enough to say, I need you for this, but we're going to give you, Wednesday off. We'll do a pre-tape. Just need some organization in it. I don't think it's
agreed.
I don't think it's the issue that
people are refusing to direct the dates.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I think that's kind of the end of our topics for now. But just before we go, I found something that you should purchase.
Well,
I found
it is our 1 year anniversary of our show
yes.
this week. This is 1 year of the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast, and I do feel like we should treat ourselves. It was
Okay.
you listen, why not, right? I think both of us are really invested in this storyline, and I think knowing that CM Punk keeps a reminder of his love for his wife and his furry four-legged family member Larry in the form of a friendship bracelet is something that brings me a lot of joy. And I think, Trish, you should take a trinket that reminds you of your loved ones wherever you go, just like the Second City Saint does, by making the CM Punk friendship bracelet yours. One look at this accessory, Trish, will let everyone know you'd fight to get your piece of flesh if anyone questions your loyalty to the people you hold dear.
Yeah, because everyone needs to know my loyalty to my wife and my four-legged member friend Larry. Wife and dog Larry must actually be. It's happened so many times now. It's got to be written in as like you have to write this, doesn't it? It has to be. I mean, I'm sure. But yeah, I would have gone with he's not here to make friends. He's here to make money. But now you can do both with this special CM Punk friendship. As we take money away from, we don't give money to the person who actually gave it as a sentimental gift, and we make it this corporate thing that you all need to wear and share with each self while you wave your Alexa Bliss doll.
Poor Lily. Oh God.
Lily got a name.
I know. Well, the friendship bracelet, with capital F, capital B, right?
Yeah. I believe it's been redone now and it says CM Punk on it. So you can get your CM Punk friendship bracelet where you can pretend you're friends with CM Punk. Or maybe we should get one.
Redacted. Oh, I'm biting my tongue. Okay. We have to end before I lose my shit.
Okay.
I lost my shit too many times this episode already.
It was too good not to. I'm sorry. I saw it and I laughed for about 15 minutes. I even woke Usagi up and he looked at me like, what are you laughing about? Stupid rabbit.
Again, there are wrestlers I would buy a friendship bracelet from. CM Punk is not one of them.
Well, your Orange Cassidy's a heel now. So, yeah, you were at trauma on Friday night. You came out to the best friends theme. It caused me trauma.
Have I not suffered enough? I mean, you're feuding with Chris fucking Jericho again. Why?
It's all right. They had a passable first two falls where the crowd were just horrendously booing Mystico, and then the third fall, Jericho was like, "I'm done. I'm dead," and it just.
All I hope. I just really want this Jericho Orange Cassidy feud to end with a tag match with Mystico in Grand Slam, and then everyone can move on to something a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, and we can stop lying about what happened in Mexico, which needs to cut that bullshit out. Just please.
What the fuck are you doing?
Not
Seriously.
up for that. Right, okay. Right, that's enough. I took the fun ending out of that there, so there we are. What's fun though? So this has been it's not even our anniversary episode, but it has been the anniversary episode in a very weird way of the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. So yeah, thank you for being with us for the last year. If you joined us when we started, if you joined us later on, if you joined us after the CM Punk episode, which I think a fair few people did know, but we appreciate every one of you, all the feedback, all the comments, all the artwork, all the memes. Every way that you interact with us is most appreciated. And seeing as it is our 1 year anniversary, we need to say a big thank you to producer Leah, who I am terrible at giving weekly things to, and I really should, because I truly mean this. We would not be here.
It doesn't run. Agreed.
It doesn't run without Leah.
Nope.
I am technically inept.
Yes.
So I have to be guided on absolutely everything. But she has so much patience with us and puts in so much time and effort. And we actually wouldn't be here without Leah at all, because this is all Leah's idea.
Agreed.
So thank you so much for all the work you put in. We try and make you proud. I make you laugh. I just try and make you laugh.
Yes.
Every week. So we very, very much appreciate it. This is the soppy week. Bless us all on this network, on the Social Suplex Network. Rich Latinelli making us cry last week at the 12th anniversary of.
Also want to say, if you have not listened to Tunnel Talk, the last 2 weeks have been on fire because the Tunnel Talk's gals have decided to run their own wrestling promotion based around the televisions in gas stations at the pumps. So please give it a try, because I laughed my butt off on a plane today in a way that was probably should have been embarrassing, but I wasn't embarrassed by it. So that was a good time.
Yeah, we also do appreciate how many people through us or through other members of the Social Suplex team have found things like Tunnel Talk and have really had that kind of energized the way that they view wrestling and talk about wrestling, and that's so important. I keep saying it because I think it's true. So I think that's great. But yeah, you can listen to all the other shows on the Social Suplex Network through your podcast feed or through their website. You can join us on the Social Suplex Discord, where we will answer any questions practically, especially if you tag me, because my memory is shocking. But you can also interact with many other users there throughout a number of channels and the hosts of all the other podcasts on the network. You can also find us on Twitter at Trish and Sarah, at Trish and Sarah. And if you have any questions, comments, feedback, anything you wish, you can email us at trishandsarahpod@gmail.com, trishandsarahpod@gmail.com. We will be back in I think the next thing's going to be the Social Suplex.
Yeah.
Meet and greet session.
Friday the 27th at 6 p.m.
Come and join us there. Ask us anything. Hopefully my football mood will be better by that point. And yeah, we can just wind James up about his college football. He's not pressing me for doing that.
Amongst other things.
Amongst other things. But yeah, come and join us for that. That should be fun, having everybody together for that celebration. So until then, until the next episode of Trish and Sarah, thank you for listening, and we'll speak to you soon.